let us come to the mains topic. Today this mains topic is basically discussing about India's disaster response framework, right, in the backdrop taking the case study of 2024 Wayanad landslides as an example. Now the article main point is that is India's disaster response is slowly being centralized, right. From a cooperative approach to disaster relief, are we turning into a centralized and charity based approach from the center? That is what it is saying. So to put things in the context, the 2024 Wayanad landslides had killed approximately 300 people and costed or loss resulted in a fiscal loss of 2200 crore for the state of Kerala. And as the Kerala state requested help from the center has only allocated 260 crore as disaster relief, that is just 11% of the entire loss suffered by the state. Now in order to there are certain issues in this entire process of disaster relief, and so these issues prove that we are slowly getting into a centralized model rather than a cooperative model. Before getting into these issues, let us understand the national disaster financing framework in India. Right. See, the disaster financing framework in India is basically of two types. One is state disaster response fund and the second is national disaster response fund. The state disaster response fund is 75:25, 75 by center and 25 by state, right. In Himalayan states it is 90:10, 90% by center and 10% by the states, and NDRF is completely by the center, right. The purpose of say SDRF is for the immediate relief, shelter, food, medical care and some small scale compensation, whereas the purpose of SDRF is to supplement whatever the state is needed based upon the severity of the calamity. Please understand this, NDRF purpose is to supplement SDRF based upon severity of the calamity. Now this is the disaster financing framework of India. Now what are the 5 problems that we are encountering here? The first thing is relief norms. For example, even now according to Disaster Management Act, the relief, even now the ceilings are very low, in the sense that a loss of life is still paid 4 lakhs, whereas loss of shelter or house is barely 1.2 lakhs. So these are useful for your sustenance needs, but not to fully recover from the disaster. Next thing is that ambiguity in classification. In the previous slide I discussed with you saying that the NDRF will supplement SDRF based upon the severity of the disaster. Now there is no definition of severity of the disaster. So what happens is that what constitutes a severe disaster is not defined, and that is left to the discretion of the center, right. And the third problem is that the release of aid is not procedural, is procedural but not automatic, in the sense that, for example, if you say that if there is a loss of 300 lives, then it is considered as severe and automatically release the funds, or if you say that there is 10% more rain above the normal, it is considered moderately severe and release this amount of funds. So there is no automatically triggering of severity. It is a long lengthy process where the first state has to submit a memorandum, the central will assess the memorandum, and there will be a high level committee which will tour the situation and then finally give the approval, right. And the Finance Commission recommendations for this are also very weak, in the sense that Finance Commission is using population and total geographical area to estimate the exposure rather than actual hazards. For example, depending upon the population as well as geographical area, it is going to estimate, okay, this is the amount of fund that should be going, rather than really giving these funds based upon the hazard estimation, right. Some areas might have low population and low area, but they will have high hazard vulnerability, right. That is not taken into consideration, right. Considering all this, we have a deep institutional flaws here. For example, the Kerala, in the Kerala scenario itself, right, the center only allocated 260 crore, saying that there is an already existing 780 crore in as an unspent SDRF balance, and also there is a 529 crore interest free capital given to Kerala. So, since there is already 780 crores there and also 589 crore of interest free capital, we are only giving you 260 crore to take care of the situation. But the 780 crore that is there in SDRF is for committed fund. Right, this 780 crore is already committed for certain activities. It is not committed to this particular disaster, it is committed to certain other activities. Moreover, the SDRF rules prevent immediate spending. SDRF rules prevent immediate spending. Right, forcing states to retain reserves of liquidity, in the sense that you have to have certain amount of liquidity ready to spend immediately, because you cannot take it from SDRF reserves because it cannot be spent immediately. So, because of all these institutional problems and because of the discretion in the hands of state to classify a disaster based upon the severity and release of aid, the article argues that there is a centralization tendency in disaster relief. Now, the article also says that there are some global best practices we can follow here. For example, in US, the disaster is assessed based upon the per capita disaster or per capita damage, whereas in Mexico it will automatically triggered based upon natural elements like wind speed or rainfall. In Philippines, again it will be done by fatality incidents, number of people died will depend the severity of the crisis. In Africa and Caribbean, insurance facilities will use the satellite based mapping to assess the disaster and release the funds. So, these are some of the global best practices where there are set of procedural rules and guidelines of how the fund will be released by the federal government to the state government. There is no discretion. So, that is what the article basically talks about. The article says that we should decentralize this and work in a cooperative way and have a guidelines which will clearly mandate what is the disaster, what constitutes a severe disaster, and what are the circumstances under which NDRF funds is released to state, so that the next disaster that strikes any state will not create a problem for that state, because disasters are not just becoming a loss of life issues, but also becoming a fiscal strain on the state, and it is responsibility of the center to ensure the states do not suffer from the fiscal strain of a disaster. So, that is what basically this article is discussing about, right. That is it for today's DNA session. We will see you tomorrow again. Thank you.